Hello and welcome to Chess Book Reviews 124. I do apologize for not having done one of these for a while. This is about Frank Marshall. The reason that I haven't done one of these for a while is because I've had terrible problems with my computer, several viruses visiting, and it's been very difficult to know what to do. Before we start, thanks to a new subscriber, A. David. Thank you, A. David, for subscribing, and I hope you enjoy yourself as much as anybody else. 3 books on Frank Marshall. This is quite a modest effort. It's also a bad one. It doesn't actually mention the word chess. I imagine this had a dust cover at some point. It's by P. Wenman, who was never the most distinguished of authors. Ex-Scottish champion. Well, yes, he was. That is correct. This contains 100 games by Frank Marshall, played between 1894 and 1941. He died in 1944. So that will give you some background to the US Grandmaster. It says his death deprived chess of one of the bright, freshest spirits and noblest characters. I agree with that. Botvinnik sent a message saying, he was a player on the same rank as Alekhine and Capablanca, which he wasn't. But Marshall's tournament record is examined here. Neatest print, but nevertheless, it is. Some effort has been made here to, draw all the threads together. It's easy to be my usual sneery self, but the fact remains that's rather good. And the first game is against Pillsbury, and it's played in Montreal, played in Canada. The notes are very light, and I'm not sure that they're so good, but there we are. I'll give you an indication. Just comments. Yeah, I would say comments rather than notes. There we go. The second is published by Keen's outfit when it was going. It isn't going anymore. Harding Simpole. This is the 50 years of chess, triumphs of an American chess champion. I bought this for £7 in the BCM shop in Baker Street in London some years ago. I don't promise you could buy that there now, but you never know your luck. This was originally a Bell, and let's face it, what wasn't published in 1943, so it's just before poor Marshall died. I often think people that died in 1944, particularly perhaps Americans, were spared the distress of the Second World War. That's probably as ill-informed a comment as I'm ever likely to make, but it just flashed through my mind. Here's Frank in old age. Cigars, no doubt, in the ashtrays. And he's working on some positions. There we are. He became non-playing captain of the US team, which did so very well before the Russians reared up. This is Frank talking about himself. I have the opportunity to salute the names of some of my old friends. G.E. Roosevelt, president of the Marshall Chess Club. William Beck. And so it goes on. This is his early games. There's a quote from Le Monde Illustré of Montreal. So no doubt it was in French. This is called Winning My Spurs. And here he is as a young master doing exactly that. Yeah. The last sentence of the introduction to this section says, I was ready with bigger things. He was too. He played, I had to write this down because I didn't know, a match in 1907 against Lasker for the world title. Here's a picture of Mrs. Marshall. Here's a bow in the back of her hair. There we are. I imagine, particularly by the standard of chess players, that Frank Marshall was a nice chap. Condense into relatively few lines the notable events. The most important of my life is no easy matter. Heartened by my excellent showing at Vienna tournament and continued my good work at Monte Carlo tourney of 1904, with first prize within my grasp, I refused Maroczy's offer of a draw in the last round, and with what seemed incredible youthful confidence, went on to try to win. Result was a dismissal loss and dropped to third place. Oh dear. Here he is with his wife and son. It's not a very good picture, but maybe it'll get some there. See? They look quite subdued, don't they? Frank Jr. He talks about coming across to Europe. He defeated Jackson W. Showalter in a match. And he voluntarily retired in 1936. Yes, they had different rules about their championships and whom could declared champion. He calls the years 1915 to 1936, which were, of course, terribly troubled ones, particularly in Europe, championship years. And then from 1937 onwards to 1942, retirement years. And the game starts in 1893 when he played in a simul, I think, against Steinitz. Well, who better to start your career when playing against the world champion? And these games, unlike this book, have notes by Frank Marshall himself. Well, they claim to have, and it's probably by Fred Reinfeldt. In point of fact, it doesn't make it any the worse for that. Fred Reinfeldt was a good writer for average and below average strength players. I will not have a word said against him. Here's something of interest. The Evans Gambit declined. You seldom see that. Bishop going to b6 rather than taking on b4 when b4 is offered. Bishop takes b4. In this game, Mr. R. Short, no relation, declined the gambit. The finish is devastating. 18 move mate. Yes, well, Frank could be good, couldn't he? He was also a very great showman. That's part of the US trait. you know, like Koltanowski or whatever. He would tour the boards and he enjoyed himself as much as the audience and hopefully as much as the other competing players. Here he is playing against Pillsbury, his fellow American. He calls him the immortal Pillsbury on even terms. And he played the Petrovs. With 3d4, 3 pawn to queen 4, in other words, Steinitz's move. And I'm rapidly reminded by my friend Mike Sheehan, Marshall liked to sack pawns. He used to drum up one hell of an initiative. Here he is. This is really crack games, and when all these opponents are known of, I mean, Pillsbury, and then Amos Byrne, and then George Marco, the great annotator. Here he is playing against James Mason, and here he is playing against the first British chess champion, who had emigrated, W.E. Napier, William Ewart Napier. He competed often with C.S. Howe, A.W. Fox, and myself. He was sent abroad by his parents to study music, but he preferred chess, and so played in quite a few European tournaments. At one time, he was champion of Great Britain. He was, in point of fact, the first British champion, but they don't quite say that. He was still active today and plays a fine game of chess and writes unusually well on the subject. Well, of course, that was true long ago. And this is from Hanover, 1902. And it's an Albion Counter Gambit. This isn't a book I know almost at all, so I'm a little bit at sea, but not out of my depth, which isn't quite the same thing, is it? When he played Lasker, he did lose very heavily. But then again, with respect, who else, who didn't? Here he is playing the Petrovs. In this game, I adopted a sacrificial counterattack, which subsequently, despite the doubts expressed by many critics, managed to hold its own for almost 20 years. How about that then? And that's in the Petrovs. That's what I was trying to say earlier. Here's a game against Rubinstein, and he won it. Rubinstein's inexactitude in the opening, a great rarity in his games, leads to a bad position from which he never recovers. Marshall is plonking out a stone wall with f4, 6f4. Yeah, if you want to get good, don't play that. I don't care who plays it. Don't play it yourself. He plays tribute in 1908 to Richard Reti, later became an active proponent of the new theory of flank development. A Czech who lived in bohemian existence, Reti was lame, spoke with a high-pitched voice, was a prolific writer of chess books and columns. Well, I didn't know that. Obviously, this book is an absolute mountain of information and interesting games. And I have to say, to my shame, I don't really know it. I've had it for some years. Here he is playing against Santazier. Yes, and Santazier plays the Evans Gambit. Hidi Santazier has been my good friend for many years, telling me he's played quite a number of exciting games. It's nice they look upon it in that way rather than, I'll kick the bastard in the head sort of thing. It cannot be repeated often enough the players must beware of setting out on marauding expeditions before completing their development. Here is a case in point. And it's just a game, Frank, with black against good old Sir George Thomas. Well, there's a section at the back on openings. I don't suppose it's anything particularly fantastic, and 140 games. The triumphs of an American chess champion. There. I recommend it. Now, this book won an award and is like all so many good books in my library. It's by Andrew Soltis. Andy Soltis is you won't have to mind my saying this, of mature years now, and is a US Grandmaster. This book features the whole life of Frank Marshall from a modern perspective, and it won the English Chess Federation Award for the best book of the year. I'm not sure it is the best book of the year, and it quotes Unputdownable, thoroughly researched and splendidly written British Chess Magazine. Well, I don't know when the British Chess Magazine said that. Reigned as American champion from 1907 to 1936, the longest stint of anyone in history. A colourful character, always decked out in Ascot. In Ascot, I don't know what an Ascot is. Possibly some item of clothing, a jacket perhaps, and chewing a cigar. His career coincided with many evolutionary changes in competitive chess. Yes, that's true. And here he is in an early photo. Not a particularly good one, but it gives you a flavour of the old chap, doesn't it? And that's the distinctive one of him, looking proud but not haughty. And there he is with his son and his missus. And there they are out. I don't quite know what that is. Perhaps enjoying some snow. Yes, I think they're in the snow. Oh, why not? Why not be in the snow? And here he is, cigar in hand, about to have a little dip in the briny, I think. Isn't that nice to see that he enjoyed an outdoor life as well as an indoor life? This must have taken him a very long time to write. It is nearly 383 pages. Quite an detailed index and a bibliography. How about that? There's messing around, is it? This is published by Macfarlane of the USA. I'm told they're stopping. Perhaps the sales haven't been up to snuff. I've done what I can for them. 219 games. Yes, 219 games appears to be the last one in the book. Nice notes. Just give you a flavour of them. Single columns. Quite a relaxed format, isn't it? Text happily, not too small, as I always have to say. Here he is playing Mr. Sharp in 1920. And we get a Budapest Gambit, which I've been tinkering with online for quite some time. Quite recommend that, actually. It wouldn't do to play it all the time, but When you want to put your feet up and have a bit of a giggle, you watch White squirm. Here's Marshall playing the Danish Gambit against another well-known player, Duras. I have to say, with Frank Marshall, he did face the best. There can be few masters of his generation that he didn't cross swords with. Here he is in Petrov's, which I mentioned earlier, playing against Janowski. And here once again playing against Duras from Carlsberg 1911. Again went d4, d5, knight d2, knight f6, and knight g f3. I'm sorry to laugh, but look about convoluted. Then Marshall proceeded to fianchetto his queenside bishop. Oh, it's up to him if he wants to do that. QB to Q2. I think he was working overtime. Yes, this is a lovely book. I haven't really realized how special it was. But I think what makes it special is not the fact it's by Andy Soltis. No disrespect to him, far from it. But because it is about Frank Marshall. Soltis has just written an autobiography which has come out, which I haven't seen yet. I shall be looking at it. Of course I will. So it'd be interesting to link the two together and say, he said this about himself. He said this about Frank Marshall. He said this about, he's written a book about Botvinnik as well, hasn't he? And that did very well as well. It was very well received. Botvinnik was probably better documented than Frank Marshall. Little joke here, I think. I'm playing billiards with Pillsbury when in walks Marco, looking very sad. I say, "Hello, Marco. I thought you were in bed long ago." "No," he replied. "I cannot sleep. I am sick." "What's the matter?" I said. "Well, tomorrow I must play the great Marshall, and so I am sick." "Forget it. Here, have a double whiskey. You think Marshall that it is good for me," he said. After he drank, went home. Next day, he beat me so bad, I was sick. And that's an anecdote from Monte Carlo in 1903. And don't call us, we'll call you. Wonderful accents. Wonderful. Anyway, I think I've done enough. This is called Frank Marshall, United States Chess Champion, by Andy Soltis. It's published by Macfarlane. In 1994. I didn't realize it was so long ago. Well, thank you very much for listening. This has been Chess Book Reviews 124. I'm James Pratt. Thank you for your time.